Welcome once again to the It Depends Lessons in Technology Leadership podcast. I, as always, am your host, Kevin Goldsmith. And in this podcast, I share lessons I've learned moving up through technology leadership at both large companies and small ones, and hopefully give you something to work with as you try and navigate that path yourself. Each week, I cover a different topic. And this week, we're going to talk about managing managers. One of the critical skills you need to learn as you move from managing a small team to managing a larger team to eventually managing multiple teams is how to manage through others. That means managing managers. It's the kind of thing you can try and pick up, and there's ways to pick it up by interim managing teams or other things, but generally it happens that one day you aren't managing managers and the next day you are. And you can be mentally prepared for it, but you're going to learn a lot on the job. These are some of the things I've learned when I made that transition and since, where now I manage managers of managers of managers, sometimes of another layer or two there as well. I've talked in the past, even in, I think, the last episode, about a critical point for me. I was managing a tribe at Spotify, which meant I was managing a bunch of managers. I had managed managers before. At Adobe, I was managing managers. But at Adobe, the managers I was managing were very experienced. And as I spoke about in the last episode, they were in charge of technologies I didn't understand that much. So, one, I had to trust them because they knew more about it than I did. And two, they were very experienced, so they didn't need me looking over their shoulder. When I moved to Spotify, I had lots of managers of various levels of experience, but also they were really people managers, not necessarily team managers. So it was a different model if you're familiar with the Spotify model. If not, look back through the RSS feed because I do talk about it a couple different episodes. So there, the managers themselves were a little bit less senior, needed more guidance. Even though I was managing a larger team, in some ways I was even more hands-on than I had been managing a smaller team at Adobe. As I've talked about in prior episodes, I reached a point where I couldn't scale my team anymore because I was so central to everything happening in my organization. I talked before about letting go of that and the reasons why you need to do that. The part I didn't talk about, which I'll talk about now, is the managing of managers part. I talked about delegating, but I didn't talk about what that actually looks like and the kinds of things you need to do. The tension isn't just autonomy versus control, because even as what I would say a more hands-on manager of a larger organization, I was still a true believer in team autonomy, and I felt like I was giving a lot of autonomy into my team. It just so happened that I was very aware of what was happening. As I said, the tension isn't just autonomy versus control, it's leverage versus comfort. Staying close to the managers, staying close to the teams feels safe and responsible because you are accountable for what happens in your organization. How do you stay accountable if you're so far from the work that you don't know what's going on? So you want to be close to it. It feels like you're doing the right thing. But the job increasingly requires looking outward, understanding business direction, aligning with your peers, and spotting organizational risk early. Managing managers isn't really about getting closer to the work. It's about being clearer about what the work actually is. When you focus too far down, when you're looking down into your team all the time, so your focus is into your team, the managers that report to you, they lose ownership because you're focused on their teams. But you become a bottleneck because people become dependent on you. You take on a role that requires them to go through you. A lot of leaders, when you move to first managing managers, you also become a decision-making bottleneck. That happens very easily. Again, you want to be close to the work. You want to make sure the team are making the right decisions. How do you make sure the team are making decisions you agree with? Make them ask you. It's very easy to become a bottleneck in that situation. but your own leadership growth stalls. When you start managing managers, your leverage stops coming from making decisions and starts coming from providing context. So if I'm looking down into the organization, that's taking all my time. I can't be looking out or around. Maybe you're doing well as a director, just really focused in your team because your team's delivering and you're making sure that's happening. But you're also preventing your own move to VP because you're too focused in your team. You need to be actually working cross-functionally and working across the organization. That's what VPs do. How do you move from being that decision-making bottleneck to being able to have that space while still being accountable? You move from being part of the decision-making process to providing information to your team because you have more context than the managers that report to you do. That is one of the benefits of being at that level of the organization. When I got serious about being a manager, I was super deeply involved in trying to be a really good manager and trying to help my team be successful and doing whatever it took to make that team work. And that was rewarded. But that same behavior wasn't necessarily the thing that was going to work for me when I was now managing a much larger team and when I was managing managers as opposed to managing ICs. That same behavior started to create blind spots. The managers that worked for me, they lacked context. All of that was stored in my head, and I wasn't good at communicating it originally, which slowed down decisions and also led to incorrect decisions. Surprises came from above or sideways instead of below. You want the surprises to come from the team. It turned out we thought this thing was going to be easy. It was hard. We've had this incident. Those are the kind of surprises you want. I mean, obviously, you don't want that many of those. But what you don't want is another team telling you, we already did the thing you're working on, or we totally changed direction. Why are you still working on this? I learned that managers don't need more direction necessarily. They need better framing. They need to understand what the context of what their team is doing means to the larger whole. They need to provide that context to the members of their team. But that also helps them know not only why are we doing what we're doing, it helps them make better decisions. It also helps them connect to the people they need to connect to, the teams that they need to check in with, so that you don't become that bottleneck for them. And it speeds up the teams. If your managers need you involved in every decision, you don't really have a management team. You've just built a relay where everything passes through you, and you want to avoid being that relay. You are the relay to more senior management and helping put context and communication coming from more senior management. That's appropriate, but you don't want to be that relay from other teams or from your own team. And to the extent that you can not be that relay for more senior management is a positive thing if you can do it in a good way. Let's talk about two directions of leadership focus. I've talked about looking down into your organization. So that's coaching, focusing on quality, consistency, execution. You are responsible for the organization achieving that. You are not the one that has to drive all those things. You are the one that has to make sure the managers that report to you are focusing on those things appropriately and point out when they aren't and coach them to help them do it. Then there's the around. So that's strategy, alignment, organizational dynamics, external signals. These are things that are unique to that manager or manager roles. The scope of those things just increases as you move up that management ladder. That managing of managers requires that shift from down to around, especially as you manage more managers or manage managers of managers. Your value moves from decision maker when you are a manager of a team to context setter, standard setter, and sense maker. That's your job. You are a resource for those things. You are to spread that to the managers that work for you so they can spread that into your organization. Autonomy grows with shared understanding, not time served. How do you build your management team to make this happen? To start, promote for judgment and pattern recognition. Promote people who can manage the team without you having to look over their shoulder and who can drive with their own autonomy, who want their own autonomy. Look for comfort with ambiguity. Comfort with ambiguity is important because stuff comes up all the time. Obviously, you're a resource and you're available, but you don't need to be there for every time something is a little confusing. Avoid accidental overmanagement. Delegate decisions, not tasks. It's very easy, and I absolutely still make this mistake. For those of you who work for me right now, will remember me delegating tasks instead of decisions, but I try not to do that. Ask for reasoning, not permission. Just like I talked about in the last episode about challenging teams on their decision making, as opposed to telling them what to do, letting them make decisions, and then making sure they're making good decisions. For your managers, you got to do the same thing. Ask for their reasoning, make them justify why they made this decision after that decision. It's very easy to do that. They made a decision, they tell you the decision, you ask, why? What is it that made you choose this, and what else did you consider? Very obvious questions, not rude at all, and the kind of thing that they should be able to answer if they're following a good process. And if they're not, that's a discussion point. If you ask for permission, come ask me before you make your decision. You're making yourself a bottleneck. Provide context at the right altitude. Share what you're learning from peers and executives. Communicate. Give that context in your one-on-ones, in your management meetings. Let people know what you're hearing. Explain the trade-offs and constraints, not just outcomes. Explain your thinking. Explain what you're choosing between, why you made this decision, not that decision. What things you're looking at. What are the constraints that the entire organization is working against? Is there a partnership that we're trying to preserve? Is there a target revenue goal that we're trying to hit? And that's why we're doing some of these things, because that helps the managers that work for you make good decisions themselves, lets them be more autonomous, lets you not be a bottleneck for them. Raise the bar consistently. Calibrate managers against common standards, what you would expect from a manager. Make your career ladder, your career pathing system clear on the management path, just like you do for your ICs, so that they know what to do. When you notice inconsistency, when you notice gaps, address those early. Inconsistency in your management becomes cultural debt super fast. Different managers acting differently with their team, people talk, they hear about it. What they hear is one person's telling us to do things this way, another person's telling us to do things in a totally different way. It makes you and the leadership look like you're making up as you go along, which is very concerning for people who are trying to do their jobs. What are some warning signs that you're overmanaging? Managers escalate decisions to you that clearly belong to them. That should be pretty obvious, which decisions are theirs versus yours. I'll talk in a minute about an exercise that I use to help people decide which decisions should be theirs versus mine. You're involved in hiring or performance issues or prioritization way deeper than you expect. I do know CTOs, even in some organizations my size or even larger, that insist on being in the hiring of every person that joins their team, which is the bigger the team you have, the more people you're hiring, even if you're not scaling, just attrition and things like that can take a significant amount of your time. It becomes very problematic for the candidates because somebody's trying to schedule you. I am very clear about which roles I believe I need to be involved in and which I don't. And I'm not involved in a lot of them because I would become a bottleneck for hiring. I am involved in the ones that I think are going to be critical to the whole organization. The higher level roles where you're going to have a lot of cross-organization impact, those are the roles I feel I need to be part of, because putting the wrong person in that role can create a lot of damage in the organization itself. But do I need to be on every developer round? No, I don't. That's not a good use of my time. And if I can't trust the people in my teams to hire well, then we got a bigger problem. I understand some folks feel it's really critical for them. I think that's probably a decision you shouldn't be involved in, depending on the size of your team. Same thing with performance issues. Is that getting escalated to you? Should it be escalated to you? Maybe eventually it should, only if the manager isn't handling it well. And that's usually a coaching moment. Another warning sign: managers ask, what do you want me to do? Instead of, here's what I'm thinking. Luckily, I haven't had a manager ask me that for a long time, but I have. It's certainly happened in the past. What that tells you is they either believe they don't have the tools to make the decision, which is a coaching opportunity, or they believe that that isn't their decision to make, which is certainly a warning sign, or which also can happen if you are overmanaging, is they know what they want to do, but you've overruled them enough times that they just stopped making their own decisions, because if you constantly reverse their decisions, it makes them look bad. So it's just easier to ask you. That's learned helplessness. And you get that at different levels of the organization. But when you see it in managers, that means you got some work to do on yourself, but also with your team and your managers. There's a great book, not very long, called Turn the Ship Around by L. David Marquette. You see it commonly in lists of books managers should read. And it's all about empowering your team and moving decision-making down into the organization. It's a good book. I particularly enjoyed it. It was very helpful. And I read it around this time that I was talking about, where I was trying to learn how to do this better myself in order to scale and grow. Another warning sign is that work slows when you're unavailable. You go on vacation, you're at an offsite. Often people want to feel like if they're not around, things aren't going to go well, because that means that when they're there, they're contributing actively and valuably. But realistically, if your job is to provide context and help make sure good decisions are being made, the test of whether you're doing that well is if that happens when you're not around. Does that mean you can be gone for a year and expect everything to be the same? No, absolutely not. But you should be able to go on vacation and not have to worry that you're going to have to weigh in on 100 decisions, or they'll all wait till you get back. If work is slowing when you're not around, that's a warning sign. Feeling indispensable usually isn't a success metric. It really is a warning sign. If your calendar is dominated by internal reviews and status meetings, you're on every team's status or whatever, often, quarterly or monthly or whatever, some infrequent cadence, totally cool. If you're so busy with those that your schedule is blocked and you struggle to find time to do other things, that's probably a warning sign, because you're way too close to the work. Now, the great thing about that is that also scales with the size of your organization. If you're running a small organization, you can be closer to the work because the organization is small, or at least more aware of it. That doesn't mean your calendar should be owned by team meetings that you're sitting in on. But, as your organization grows, it becomes impossible to do that. If people are scheduling their team meetings around you, teams in your organization, that's a huge warning sign. Another warning sign is feeling needed and slightly anxious about stepping away. When everything flows through you, things might work, but they only work while you're there. And that's not good. The system works, but only because you're holding it together. And that is a not good place to be, because that means you can't get promoted. That means you can't take a new job. That means you can't take an extended vacation or have a child or things like that, because everything will explode while you're away. So those are some of the warning signs. What do you do if you see those warning signs and you realize you're already overmanaging? Start by acknowledging it to yourself first, then explicitly with your managers. Staying too close to execution limits your manager's growth, and it quietly caps your own as well. Recontract with your management team. Clarify what decisions are theirs, where you expect judgment, not alignment, and when escalation is appropriate. There's a talk I gave at the lead dev conference in 2018 called Using Agile Techniques to Build an Inclusive Team. And in this talk, I share an exercise, and I'll link to the video of the talk in the show notes. I give an exercise that I use that I learned from Esther Derby. She and Jerry Weinberg really helped me when I was in this kind of spot where I was struggling to scale. And that is essentially a contract that I build interactively with the managers that report to me, where we talk about which decisions I expect them to do on their own. And I just expect them to do it. I don't need to know about these decisions. The set of decisions that I expect them to make and execute, and then tell me about them because I need to know that this decision has been made. I don't need to participate in the making of this decision, but I need to be aware of it. So that might be hiring, or depending on the person, there's going to be different situations where I need to know that. There's a set of decisions that I expect to be consulted on. Now, that is where I expect you to make a plan and to make a decision, but before you put that decision into action, I need to approve it. That might be something like opening up a new rec. That might be something like firing somebody. I might want to be involved in that decision, or at least approve that decision, for example. And then there's a set of decisions where this is in your area, but this is a decision that I will make and not you. That happens more around larger team events or things like that, with less experienced managers or new managers where we're working together and we haven't worked together for that long. There might be some of those things where, as I'm coming to understand the organization, there are certain decisions I want to be making, but the goal is that over time, all decisions move from me being involved to just me being informed to just not being informed at all. You just make those decisions. I'm expecting you to do that and not involve me in them. Go and watch that video. It's 20 minutes. There's a few things I share and that may be helpful. That technique that Esther Derby gave me, which was incredibly important for me to learn how to delegate better to the managers that worked for me. Jürgen Appello also has a version of this called Delegation Poker. I think he's blogged about it. It's also in his Management 3.0 book. That's a little bit more sophisticated. It has more options, including we are going to work on this together, stuff like that. Any technique like this, you can make up your own. You don't have to use the one that I use or the Jürgen Appello one. But this is one way to make what the expectations are very clear at a decision level as opposed to career ladder level. What's another way to help you stop overmanaging? Resist the urge to just fix it once more. Well, I fixed it last time. The team's really struggling. I'm going to fix it again. This is learned helplessness. We've talked about this already. You don't want to make the team dependent on you to fix them. They need to learn to fix these things themselves. Expect that as you move from being that central decision-making or information hub for your team, stuff is going to slide for a little bit. This is a change. This is a culture change. This is expectation change. It doesn't happen immediately and then everything's better. So managers are going to test boundaries. I thought I'm supposed to be making more decisions. I'm making this decision. You're like, whoa, hold on. That's not a decision you can make for X, Y, and Z reasons. It happens. Decisions may be uneven. One manager makes one decision, another manager makes a different decision. I talked about this in Every Decision Makes a Policy. So that's a chapter in my book. It's an earlier podcast. It's also in the newsletter. So if you're interested in that, I'll link to that also in the show notes. That's the problem when managers are making uneven decisions. But that's going to happen as you step back and they try and figure out how they step forward. Discomfort, that's just part of the transition. So you're going to have to live through it. You're going to have to ride that Kubler-Ross change curve through that valley of despair to get to the other side. I'll link to that as well. This is a link-heavy podcast. Use check-ins with your teams, with your managers. Use your one-on-ones with your managers to understand how decisions are being made, not to approve them. As you say, I'm expecting you to make these decisions in the future. When your next one-on-one, they're going to tell you, I made this decision. And even if you think they made the wrong decision immediately, instead of just saying that's the mistake, because again, you're going to just tell them, I'm going to overrule your decisions, which means they're just going to come and ask you rather than deal with making a decision and then being overruled. Instead, talking about how they made that decision. What data points did you use? What are the things you're worried about in the future? What do you think will be the side effects of this decision? Have you thought through this? If through that process, they realize, oops, I wasn't thinking about this, they'll realize themselves that they made the wrong decision. Often, surprisingly often, they'll actually show you that they thought about stuff you hadn't considered and they made the right decision. And you would have reversed that decision or made a bad decision or worse decision. Replace control with calibration, align on principles, review outcomes, and adjust expectations together. That's what you're trying to achieve. You're trying to help all your managers calibrate so that they're making better decisions than you are because they're closer to the work. And if you're giving them good context, they will make better decisions than you can, but they need to know how to make good decisions with that context that you're giving them and being closer to the work. So that's where they need to understand the principles with which you or your manager or the organization is aligning. And you're going to work through the outcomes. You made this decision. Did this achieve what you thought it would? Even if you think it was the right decision, it's still good to review the outcome. What could we have done differently? What should we think about differently next time? And adjust those expectations together. I mentioned this delegation framework. We revisit this exercise on a regular basis because over time, things move. And they move from me being more involved in the decisions to me being less involved in the decisions. And that's important. It also demarks that person's growth and demonstrates my trust in their decision making and adjusts the expectations, which is important. And we're both very clear about it because we've done this exercise. Managers are balancing pressure from their teams, expectations from you, and incomplete information about the broader organization. New managers often optimize for approval when their leaders are hands-on. If you are not delegating decision-making into your organization, a new manager is going to pick up on that and optimize for your approval because they're also less confident about their decision-making, which means you're training them to let you make decisions for them. Experienced managers may read close oversight as a lack of trust. They don't need your help. They don't want your help. They want to run their team because they do it all right. They just want your support and they want you to recognize that they're good at running their team. And it's hard when you're running their team. So you can imagine if you are a director or you're an engineering manager and your director or your VP is over your shoulder all the time. That would be horrible. That would be a crummy job. And for those of you who are in that situation, I'm sorry. When you don't share context, information, so that people can make good decisions, managers still see what's going on. They're not blind and they're aware. They talk to people. So they'll see stuff happening in the larger organization. You haven't given them the context. So what do? They invent stuff. Well, I'm betting this is happening because of this. Usually that's wrong. We see ICs do that too. There's another reason why you want to be providing context into your organization, because otherwise people see stuff that pattern matches maybe to something that happened earlier at the company or maybe a prior company they were at. And all of a sudden they start making up stories about why things are the way they are that are just totally wrong. And all of a sudden you have lots of problems you have to deal with, a ton of management debt or culture debt. Also, when context isn't shared, the alignment drifts because people don't know what they need to know. So now you got different managers guiding their teams in different directions because they don't know any better. The quality varies, again, because people don't know what's expected of them. People don't know what they're working towards. People don't know what the constraints are. And so they're doing what they think is the right thing because they don't have information to tell them it's not the right thing. When leaders stop providing context, managers don't stop deciding. They just start filling in the gaps themselves. Your behavior defines the real autonomy in the system, regardless of stated intent. No matter what you say, it's what you do that's going to define the real autonomy in the system. You can talk about it all you want. If you're micromanaging your managers, you're reducing autonomy in the system. Managers don't really listen to what you say about autonomy. They watch where you step in. In my own growth as a manager, I had to learn that being in the loop and being aware and being involved wasn't the same thing as being effective. It felt effective because I was there, I was in the middle of it, but it wasn't effective because I was slowing everything down. I was making it harder for the managers that work for me to grow, and I was making it harder for my teams to go as fast as they needed to. My own growth depended on me stepping back and looking outward and taking on new stuff. We talked about how I designed my first career pathing system, and that was because I had learned to step back, I had more time, and that my boss, who was the CTO, could delegate that to me. He delegated a similar project to me before, and I hadn't done great with it, partially because I was so busy trying to manage my team. I didn't really have the time to invest in the sort of open-ended project. That was a big project. Once I'd learned to step back, let my good managers make better decisions on their own, and I was still making sure that good decisions were being made, but I wasn't involving myself in every one of them. Now I actually had the time to start taking work from my manager, which helped me because my next job was CTO. And now I was doing his job. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I was still so focused down in my organization. I had to understand that strong managers don't need proximity. They don't need me to be on top of them or to be looking over their shoulder. They need clarity. They just need to know what they need to know so that they can do their thing. Your behavior teaches the organization how safe it actually is to make decisions without you. If you are constantly revisiting, reviewing, undoing decisions, people stop making them because they just know you're going to undo them anyway. So why bother? Just ask you what you want and then do that. Which means, again, you become the decision-making bottleneck for your team. Everything slows down. And you probably make worse decisions because you're not that close to the work. To sum up, managing managers is about leverage, not presence. Overmanaging limits your manager's growth and your own. A useful test is, could you step away for 2 weeks, somewhere maybe without internet? Would your managers make good decisions? And would you be using that time to deepen your understanding of the organization? Because when you came back, you would see what worked and what didn't while you were gone, and you should be figuring out how to be gone again and not have some of those challenges. A useful test of leadership isn't whether things run when you're there. It's whether they actually improve when you're not. Thanks again. Just one more reminder, I'm speaking at Confu towards the end of February in Montreal. I think there's still tickets available. I'm giving 2 different talks, the director to CTO path, how to follow it or how to mentor it, and another talk on what to do when you have had a career setback, how to recover from that. So hope to see you there. If you are going to be there, please reach out and let me know. And I will see you next week in the newsletter. I will see you in 2 weeks back here on the podcast. Have a great week. Thanks so much for listening. Please, again, subscribe, rate, share episodes of this podcast on your favorite podcast app. Thank you for Answers to April for the music used in this podcast. To hear more from Answers to April, visit answerstoapril.com. This podcast is a production of Unit Circle Media.